It's great to be with you today on Mother's Day. Again, if you are a mother with us, I want to say Happy Mother's Day to you. If you missed in our announcements, all of our mothers are getting a gift from the church. You can find that in the atrium. It is a chocolate-covered strawberry, so don't miss out on that. And husbands, leave your wives alone. That is for them. So you get bacon on Father's Day, so don't miss that. I know that Mother's Day, for most of the women in this room probably, is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful day, right? It's a day of celebration. Hopefully it's a day where you're getting taken care of and being appreciated. But for others in the room, it may not be such a wonderful day. For others in the room, it may be a harsh reminder of the reality that they're living in. I know that there are women in this room that have struggled with infertility. And Mother's Day is a tough day because of that, being reminded of what God has not yet given you. And may not ever give you. And then for others, it's a harsh reminder of potentially those that you have lost. I know Ashley and I have 2 children that we'll meet one day that are in heaven, and Mother's Day can be a reminder of that as well. And so it fits really well. John Mark and I had talked about and planned towards the idea of talking to God and the conversation that we need to have with God when it seems like you have lost all hope in a situation. In order to do this, I want to introduce you to a couple of people, and we find them in 1 Samuel chapter 1. So as you're turning to 1 Samuel chapter 1, we're going to meet 3 different people. Elkanah is the husband, and he has 2 wives. I'm so glad that we don't do that anymore because I don't think I could handle 2 wives. But Elkanah has 2 wives. Peninnah and Hannah are his wives. Peninnah has multiple children. That's not an issue for her. She's had multiple children, daughters and sons to Elkanah. But Hannah has had no children. And she's had no children for Elkanah for years. They've been trying and haven't been able to conceive. And this is kind of where we find ourselves in this story. We're going to pick up in verse 4 of 1 Samuel chapter 1, and it says this. Whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, and the Lord had closed her womb. Because the Lord had closed Hannah's womb, her rival, that being Peninnah, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her till she wept and would not eat. So Hannah's facing this struggle of infertility, and then she has, I don't know what you would call it, but the other wife to her husband provoking her, right? Making fun of her. And I don't know exactly what she is saying, but she gets Hannah to the point of where she's crying. It's like pouring salt on an open wound. And I don't know if you've ever been in Hannah's particular situation, but I'm sure all of us can relate to feeling the way that Hannah feels in this moment of wanting something that is good, wanting something even that God would say is blessed, but God is not giving it to her in this season of life. And to make matters worse, she has somebody poking fun at her and making fun of her, causing her to weep and to cry. Sometimes maybe this has happened in your life in a direct way. Maybe in other times it's happened in an indirect way. Or maybe you just lost your job and you go to a dinner, you go somewhere and somebody comes to you and says, hey, how's your job going? And then all of a sudden you're reminded of the fact that you don't have a job, right? And it takes you to this place that is lower. Or maybe it is Mother's Day for you. Maybe Mother's Day is a reminder of what you don't yet have. And it takes you to a place of darkness, and it takes you to a place maybe of hopelessness. So this is the place that Hannah is in. And all of us, unfortunately, are going to face times and seasons in our lives like this. Because the reality is we live in a fallen, broken world, and we're going to experience things because of the brokenness of this world. And when that happens, there's a conversation that we can have with God to help our situation. So I want us to look at Hannah and her story and her life and see what she does to go to the Lord in order to help her situation. Picking up in verse 8, it says this. Her husband, Elkanah, would say to her, Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? Right? So he's trying to encourage her. He's trying to enter in with her. But if you've ever been in this place that Hannah is in, You know that human words cannot help you in this situation. Her husband's trying to be a help, but it's not helping at all. I don't know if you can relate to that when somebody comes to you and you're in a broken place and they're trying to comfort you and it just doesn't seem to work. Hannah knows that she has to talk with the Lord. Picking up in verse 9, it says, once they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli, the priest, was sitting on his chair by the doorpost of the Lord's house. In her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. And she made a vow, saying, Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me, and do not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. There's something really important that we need to take note of here, because if we're not careful, we're going to misinterpret what Hannah is saying to God. You see, the misinterpretation of this would be that Hannah is trying to bargain with the Lord, which I'm sure at one point or another we've done this, right? You'll go to God and say, God, if you will just give me a raise at my job, or if you'll just give me this job, then I'll start tithing. Or God, if you'll just do this in my life, then I'll start coming to church every single Sunday. If you'll do that, I'll join a life group. If you'll do that, I'll stop doing this, right? Where we want to bargain with God. We want to tell God, if you'll give me this, I'll give you that. You see, the problem with that mentality is you have no bargaining chips with God. Because God owns everything. Your life is God's. All the things that you have, God created. There's nothing that you can give to God because he owns everything. Everything is his. It reminds me of my son, Braxton. So in our house, we have a lot of boxes and stuff because we're remodeling and doing all this stuff. And Braxton will take an empty box because he wants to give me a gift. So he'll grab that empty box. Then he goes into my room. Then he goes into my nightstand and he will start picking out old watches, maybe some jewelry or something that I have in there, or old rings or an old cell phone, something, whatever you find in your nightstand drawer. And he'll just put all those different things in the box. He'll tape it and he'll come up to me and say, Dad, I got you a gift. It's like, oh, Braxton, thank you so much, right? And I open the gift and I see all of my old stuff, and then I go back to my nightstand and I put it up. And then he says to me, Dad, are you going to get me a gift? And so then I'm like, all right, two can play at this game, right? I take the box, I go into his room, I start putting his toys in there, and I give it to him, and he opens it. He's like, no, Dad, I want something new, right? He's trying to bargain with me. He's like, I gave you a gift, now go to the store and get me something. And I tried to tell him, hey, buddy, that's not how this works. But we play that same game, or we try to play that same game with God, right? God, if you'll do this for me, then I'll do that for you. That's not what Hannah's doing here. Hannah is making a vow to God to steward well the gift that God gives her. That's what God wants in our hearts. God wants to know and believe in us that whatever he gives us, whatever he entrusts to us, that we will steward it for his name, that we will give it back to him. And that's what Hannah is trying to say. She's not bargaining. She's saying, God, whatever you give me, I promise that I will use it for your glory. I will give it back to you. And she doesn't stop there, but picking up in verse 12, it says this. As she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk and said to her, how long are you going to stay drunk? Put away your wine. Not so, my Lord, Hannah replied. I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief. You can say that Hannah has reached the point of utter brokenness. Right? She's so broken. She's weeping so hard and in her prayer that it appears that she is drunk. And we know that she's not, but she is just so broken and downcast that she can hardly control herself. You see, a lot of us may have to get to that place in our brokenness of whatever's going on in our lives. We may have to get to that place of desperation, but we know that God hears us in our desperation. The thing that we have to be careful with is the timing of God's answer. You see, a lot of times when something's wrong in our lives or something's broken or we need something fixed, we want it fixed now. And when we go to the Lord, we're like, you need to do this and you need to fix it now. But the thing we have to understand about Hannah is it has been years that she has been begging God for a child. Years and years have gone by, and she's having to trust in God's timing. And in that, in the brokenness that we may find ourselves in, it begins to be hard. We begin to lose hope of, does God really hear my prayers? Does God know the pain that I'm experiencing? Is God going to actually answer what I am requesting of him? And we can trust that he will. It says in Matthew chapter 6, verses 7 and 8, and when you pray, do not keep on babbling like the pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. God knows where you are. He knows what you need before you ask him. And more importantly, he knows when you need it. You see, God is not controlled by time. He is outside of time. He knows your past. He knows your present. But he knows your future. God knows what you need, but he also knows when you need it. I want to bring this a little bit closer to home for us. I want you to watch this video of a family that is members here at Cottonwood, and let's listen to their story.
My name is Chris Scobie. This is my wife, Kylie Scobie. So when we got married, we both talked and consciously decided that we would wait 5 years. We just set a number, 5 years, and before we tried to start a family. So we kind of hit that 5-year mark, and so we started trying to conceive, and
it did not go well. My doctor, told me that this probably would not happen for me after so many months of trying on our own. So we started down some minimal treatments, which didn't work. Through that process, it was just heartbreaking.
I think both of us individually had, we went through kind of a dark period. I think hope was something that was negatively impacted.
So we got to a point at the end of our infertility treatments to where I just couldn't handle it anymore physically and emotionally. And Chris, he just had a talk with me to say, I think we need to take a break. And through that year, Chris had talked to me about adoption, and I did not want to talk about it. But thankfully, the Lord started changing my heart over the last year, and I started, realizing that this was something that we needed to talk about and pursue. When we decided to start the adoption process, I finally felt hopeful again. The process of adoption is so exciting because I know that the Lord loves us so much, and that he wants to bless us, and that he wants to provide for us. And that's exactly what we want to do with a baby.
I thought we were going to this process just to build our family. And the one thing that I think that God's taught us is that, he's adopted us. And if he's willing to do that for us, then why wouldn't we be willing to do that for another? And so that's been pretty huge.
Yeah. I've tried to rejoice in the sufferings, and I've tried to, pray and be thankful in our circumstances. And I just am so hopeful now, and just ready to, meet our child, and teach them who God is, and how much love that they can experience with him.
The thing that I love about the Scobie's story is, although God said no to them, which is a difficult thing to hear from God. Right? None of us want to hear no, especially about a good thing, right? Having a child is a good thing. It's a blessed thing. But there are times when God's going to say no to one thing so that we can say yes to another. And as you may be relating to their story, but in a different way of begging God to fix your marriage, or begging God to save your child, or begging God to save your parents, or begging God to give you a job or a different job, or begging God to change your circumstances. God's timing is the thing that we have to trust in. His timing is perfect in what he's trying to do in our lives so that we can gain more of him. It's not that God is withholding good things from you. It's that God is trying to give you as much of himself as is possible. I've asked Chris and Kylie if they would come and share more of their story with us so we can see exactly what it is that God did in their lives. So would you please welcome them as they come out? You know, as we got to talk through just doing this together, there was so many wonderful things that came out of I'll hand that to you. There's so many wonderful things that came out of our conversations that I couldn't help but just think, man, we just need to get up here and share and talk about what the Lord has done in your life. So to kind of kick this off, either one of you can answer this question, but what, in the trying, what were some of the answers that you felt like you were getting from the Lord?
Yeah, do you want me to go? Okay. So when we were in the middle of it, it was a long process and years and years, and we kind of got to kind of the crux of the whole process. And I'd say there was a period where I felt like I wasn't hearing the Lord in my life at all. In retrospect, I realized...
Keep going, you're good.
Okay. In retrospect, I realized that it was because I was praying for something very specific. I was listening for a very specific answer, and because I was only listening for that answer, I was hearing nothing, and that wasn't a God thing, that was a me thing.
Yeah.
And it was only when I handed that over and said, Lord, your will be done, I can't do this, I can't control this, is when I actually began to hear his voice speaking into that specific situation.
I think that's really interesting in our prayers. A lot of times when we want God to do something and we want God to give us something, we also want him to answer the answer we want to hear. Kylie, what was that like for you?
Yeah, it was really difficult for me because, when we were going through the infertility treatments and it just kept not happening, it was disappointment after disappointment. I just heard no, and that was really hard to take because I was like, why is this not happening for us, We're co-directors of a life group, and everybody was having babies at the time, and that was really hard to just watch. And I wanted to be joyful for them because the Lord was blessing their life, but it was really difficult because I was like, why not us, you know? And so I just kept hearing no over and over.
So when hearing that, there's obviously a loss, right, in that you're having to walk through in it. And so how did you, I guess in a sense, deal with or cope with the loss of that?
Yeah, I don't think I did very well. It's just so hard when you're enduring something for so long. I mean, the whole process for us from when we started this process was 8 years. And it's hard to get outside of your circumstances and see that the Lord still wants to use you while you're going through this crisis. But it's just, like the grief consumes you sometimes. Yeah. And I would tell Chris just at some points throughout this journey, I just felt like I was being held together by one string. Like I just couldn't keep it together anymore. And so it's really hard to deal with that over a long period of time.
Yeah, and Chris, as a husband, you're trying to walk with your wife through this process. What was the point where you're like, okay, enough is enough?
Yeah, we decided to make a change, and it was very difficult. As a husband, we always want to fix the thing that's broken, right? Mm-hmm. So we want to identify the problem and we want to fix it. And this is something I can fix, not something that I can do anything about, other than pray over the situation and rely on the Lord and try to comfort Kylie. And at some point, those words just feel repetitive and hollow. I'm sure. And so we got to a point where we had gone through many IUI treatments, and we got to a point where that was no longer an option, and the next step was IVF, and my heart just didn't feel settled about that. And it's a rewarding process that a lot of families find a lot of success in, but my heart just didn't feel settled for us in that situation. So I did a very hard thing, and I went to Kylie and I said, I know you're probably not going to want to hear this, but I feel like we need to take a break. I feel like we need to step outside of our situation, and we need to take a break. This was in October, and we just finished our last round, and I said, you know what, let's just pick this up in January, February. We can talk about it, pray about it, figure out that's the direction we need to go. And so we did, and we booked a vacation. We hadn't taken vacation in 4 years because we'd been going through this process. And so in December, we went on a cruise, and during that cruise, I became ill. And we got back home and went to the doctor, and I was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And so that was in December, late December. And so in January, we were supposed to be, picking this process back up and starting the conversation about, do we do IVF? On January 6th, I had brain surgery to remove the tumor, and that started a year-long process of recovery and rehabilitation, and so we kind of were pushed outside of that situation for a while, and that really was the turning point for us.
Yeah, and I think the thing that when you hear your story, it's like, okay, God, the infertility and the struggle that was there, you're already at a point where you feel like you're being held together by a string, and then the Lord allows this other thing to happen, and it just seems like, goodness gracious, is this not enough? Have we not suffered enough? How were you guys able to find sustaining strength in the Lord during that season?
Yeah.
It was really hard to take because, like you said, it was like one thing after another, and I just didn't know how we were going to make it through. But I think the Lord put that situation in our path. Number one, because that would have been really hard to deal with, me being pregnant or having a child, But I was able to get outside of my circumstance and focus on him and his recovery. And it really gave us just a time, even though he was dealing with a brain tumor and all of that, but just to breathe a little bit, and focus on just health and just a different, situation. Yeah. And it was, that's when the Lord started just mending my heart. And Chris, even throughout this year, he just started, talking to me about adoption.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, that's not a part of my story, But I think that's when the Lord started changing my heart.
So you guys start making this shift towards adoption. And when I think of that, it's, you almost want to, I would like, okay, we're going to adopt. We'll put a bow on this thing. We'll adopt next month and we'll move forward. But that's not exactly how it goes.
No, not at all. It's definitely a process that you have to be willing to step in and know that it's going to take a while. And so when we decided to move forward with adoption, we did have to take a couple months to pause and just grieve the loss of me not being able to have that pregnancy and everything that came along with it, because I knew that if I did not grieve that loss, that I could not commit to this baby that was going to come to us through adoption. And so that's when we just decided to take it easy and realize that we needed to find joy in this new, and joy and excitement in a new process.
Yeah, I think that was so important. And when we were talking earlier, Chris, you made some really important statements about the healing that needed to take place because adopting wasn't going to fix that situation, right?
Yeah, I think we're pretty close to falling into a trap, and one that we set for ourselves, or easily could have set for ourselves. And when we decided to make the change, and we decided to pursue adoption, and that was what the Lord was laying on our heart, we had to make the decision to grieve that process because we came to the realization that this decision wasn't replacing that dynamic, right? So this child wasn't to fill that hole. This child was for us to love and care for and raise, but not to fill the hole, obviously, of the loss and the pain that we've been feeling. And that was for the Lord to fill. And to put that on this child, we needed to get outside of that space so that we could grieve that, so we could fully invest in that child, because that was the Lord's work.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of us can relate to the tendency possibly to, when we've experienced loss or brokenness in a relationship, to try to grab something else to be the supplement when the Lord is the only thing that can fix our hearts and fix that brokenness. So you're into now, you're going to adopt. How long was the waiting?
So we started the process in February with our adoption agency, and we got approved to adopt a child in June. So then that starts the waiting process of they just try to find you a match of a birth mother, and it can be short or long, but most of the time it's a long process. And so when we got approved in June, we got to about 16 months.
And you guys were in a group of people that kind of went through this process together, and y'all were one of the last ones, right, that got placed. So you're seeing all of these other people you were the last one.
Yeah.
Wow. And it just is interesting of, you've got the no on having a child naturally, then you have a brain tumor, then the waiting just continues and continues. And I think that it would almost feel overwhelming and get to the point where there would be no hope. And you had a moment like that.
Yeah, I definitely, throughout this process, I knew that the Lord was faithful. I knew that his timing was perfect. But when you're going through just that disappointment and despair, it's really hard to maintain a positive attitude. But when we got to our 16 months of waiting, I just had a really rough week. And that was very difficult for me. And I just could not get out of it. I just broke, and I lost hope. I told Chris, I said, this is never going to happen for us. I know that the adoption agency says it will happen, but I was like, why hasn't it happened yet for us?
Yeah. So let's shift gears a little bit. You guys finally do get the phone call, and so let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So it was a Thursday afternoon at 2:30, and I was in a meeting with my boss, Scott Sanford, and Chris comes in and he's pointing at his phone why aren't you answering your phone? And so we rush into B116 over here, and our caseworker says, we have this opportunity for you, and she tells us the details, and this has happened 5 times before this, and so we're like, okay, well, we'll just go through the motions. Maybe it'll be our time, maybe it won't. And so we say, yes, it's this little girl who was born 33 weeks, she was 2 weeks old in the NICU, and so we're sitting there, and we say, yes, we're open to that possibility, so go ahead and show our book. And then she says, we have a confession to make that the parents signed away their rights already, and we can choose who her parents will be, and we chose you guys to be her parents. And so we just started bawling. We were just crying, and just so thankful and just overcome with joy at this new possibility that was coming into our life. And it was just like a weight was lifted off of our chest, and it was just such a great day. Yeah. And then they said, pick her up in 2 days. And we were like, whoa, okay. So
there's no 9 months building up to this.
So it was awesome.
Yeah, I would love it, if you guys are okay with it, if we could meet baby Quinn. Yeah, so Chris, if you'll get her. And the reason I wanted to do this is because this is tangible evidence, right? We get to see God's grace and his love towards his family. Yeah, we can clap for this, absolutely. And so Quinn is a prayer answered from 8 years, right? It took 8 years to get to this point. And she became y'all's officially this week, right?
On Friday.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah, of course.
That's so cool, yeah. So now, kind of looking back on y'all's journey, would you change anything? Has God proven himself to be enough?
Yeah, I think after 8 years of kind of being in ice for, really a desert, in some regards, there were great moments, but it was a really tough period. And we're not alone. Everybody has something that, is difficult, knows they're hearing, and challenge they're struggling with, whether it's medical or obviously infertility or whatever else it may be. We realize that any of those situations where we wanted it to turn out differently, had it, Quinn is not with us, and Quinn is our daughter. She's not a child that's placed with us. She is our daughter. The Lord made her for us. And so looking back, we just have to be grateful for those 8 years, because it brought us Quinn.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we learned a lot throughout this process. I don't think we would be the parents that we are today if we wouldn't have gone through each of those circumstances. And like you said, like Quinn would not be our daughter if anything was different. And we just had to. I mean, we knew this throughout the process, but God's timing is perfect. And he was saving this sweet little baby girl just for us.
Yeah.
And that we just had to be faithful and serve him while we were waiting. That's incredibly hard to do.
Yeah.
It's incredibly hard to step outside of your circumstance and say, I will serve you no matter what is going on in my life. But the Lord is faithful, and he does bring us out of that. And it will take some time to heal your heart from the grief and the loss that you did experience over those years. But then there's so much joy at the end.
Yeah,
So.
absolutely. Thank you guys so much. If you would give them a round of applause one more time. Thank y'all for sharing your story with us. The thing that I love so much about what God has done in their lives is we all truly can relate to this. If you have struggled with infertility, surely you can relate to this, but all of us have gone through tough times. All of us have been in a place where we need God to move, otherwise we're not gonna make it. And so what I wanna do is I just wanna pray for us real quick and then you'll be dismissed. But I wanna encourage you, there's gonna be individuals down front that would love to pray with you if you find yourself in a desert-like situation. And we didn't have time to cover all of Hannah's story, but God does give her a son. He answers her prayer, and her son is Samuel, who does amazing, amazing things for the Lord. So God has good things for his people if we will just trust in his timing. I'll pray and then you'll be dismissed. God, thank you for stories like Hannah. Thank you for stories like the Scobies, that we can look at the testimony of your faithfulness in their life. I pray for those who are in a struggling season, maybe even right now, that you would meet them where they are, that you would be enough for them in the season to get them to the place where you can give them what you have for them, that being yourself. And so, God, I just pray that you would move powerfully in all of the lives represented here in this room this morning. And I pray, God, that you would do it for your glory. And in Jesus' name, amen. You're dismissed. If you need prayer or would like to talk with someone, please come front. Thank you for being with us this morning.